They remind us that the most painful betrayals are rarely perpetrated by strangers. They are manufactured by the very people you shared your whole heart, your faith, your finances, your expectations. That is exactly what blew in the face of a stunned crowd when Kody Brown walked into that parking lot. His face flushed, his voice fumbling for words, while furious family supporters erupted with one sentence that hit harder than any blade could. Kody lied. Hey friends, it's Anya here with Reality Recap. I'm so glad you're with me today. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and leave your comments below, because I know you'll have some after this one. Envision the same man who had once spoken of himself as the protector, the great unifier, the so-called spiritual head of a great plural family, now completely alone. His eyes scanning the crowd, no Robyn to hurry to his side, no rehearsed smiles to resort to, just a wall of shattered faces crying, pushing him to finally confront all the things he hid for decades. This wasn't some collapse in hiding. It was a public disintegration. All the cracks, the stifled sobs behind closed doors, the broken bank accounts, and abandoned children's wails now blasting out in the street. Beneath it all was a struggle between control and liberty, a desperate man who would cling to power, and children and women who finally had the courage to leave it behind. Such was not one family's disintegration. It was the implosion of a lifetime of manipulation and emotional decay, coming crashing down as the women began reclaiming their lives, one brutal reality at a time. On the surface, the Browns had a glossy image, a contented, sprawling, multi-generation family with several marriages and dozens of kids held together by faith, laughter, and the strength of oneness. But take a closer look, and several of us did, and the cracks were visible well before this explosion. The program preached harmony and togetherness, but under the same smiles and manufactured group scenes, resentments brewed. Weary endurance and silent suffering had built up like steam in a sealed cooker, piping to boil over. Kody's empire was always on shaky financial grounds. Rather than invest in secure futures for all the wives and their children, his attention was drawn towards large houses, moving often, and massive ambition. Dreams that drained bank accounts and spirits dry. Robyn was portrayed as the golden wife, the legal spouse, the one who received the lion's share of Kody's time and affection. But with that boon came a cost the cameras rarely saw. In private, Robyn was losing sleep, fretting over the bills piling up, and tormented by the fear that the rest of the family despised her. She saw the money bursting. She knew the cost of every extravagant buy, every quick project Kody proposed. You could see it on her face, the slight flinch when you talked about money, the slight stiffening of voice when family planning was discussed. And Aurora, sweet, loyal Aurora, raised on the suffocating demands of Kody's life and her mother's martyrdom. She slaved so hard to be the family good daughter, the believer in the family dream. But when she was a woman, she started catching on. The side glances, the venom in her sister's words, the tension thrumming just beneath the surface. She found herself wondering, why was her mother always so exhausted? Why were her brothers and sisters slipping away? Why did it all appear to be held together with strained smiles and unseen thread? These weren't small arguments or typical family spats. These were the first dominoes to tumble. Aurora came to a silent realization. The so-called unity was not unity at all. It was control disguised as love. The family dinners, the camaraderie, the constant lectures on loyalty, it all began to ring like a prison she never signed up for. That transformation on Aurora's part, that inner awareness, was the flame that would ignite a wildfire through the entire Brown clan, scorched with the very pretenses Kody had worked so hard to uphold over so many years. She was the quiet one, the enabler who had smiled through tense family gatherings, nodded dutifully through Kody's endless monologues about loyalty and togetherness. But the weight of living at his beck and call had worn her down over the years. She'd watched her mother dwindle slowly beneath Kody's relentless disparagement, watched her brothers lose heart one after another, too drained emotionally to keep on fighting for a voice in a home that was more battle zone than sanctuary. And it all came to a head on one night that would stay with her forever. Aurora did not fight back. She didn't scream. She didn't hurl anything. She didn't have to shout or toss something. Instead, Aurora just stood there before Kody, her voice shaking at the beginning, but gaining force with each phrase. She told him in so many words. She was done living life constructed on his ego, on playing it as if control was love, on the constricting demands and constant fear of letting him down. Aurora bared her soul. She told him that she had felt imprisoned by his controlling desire to manage every aspect of her life, how his body of guidance had always been more of a prison than a protector. She told him that she had wanted her own voice, her own future, and her own life, free of the shadow of him. The room was silent. Even Robyn remained still, her head whirling with what she was hearing from the daughter she thought she knew so intimately. From there, the entire household collapsed into chaos. Kody was infuriated, running around the house, fuming about betrayal, respect, and sacrifice. He tried to shame Aurora with manipulation, pulling out all of the emotional trump cards about loyalty and what the family had sacrificed. Aurora, however, didn't bat an eyelash. That evening, she started packing her suitcase. You could sense the walls shaking from the sheer force of the emotions exploding in every room. The other kids sat silently, their eyes wide open, some unambiguously torn, uncertain whether to rally for Kody or quietly cheer Aurora on. Decades of bottled-up resentment began to bubble up suddenly. Aurora's bravery had freed something within them too, permission to feel their own deeply hidden anger and pain. Robyn, however, was caught up in her own whirlwind. She had given up so much to receive Kody's approval, money, freedom, even her own sense of self. Watching Aurora shatter those shackles pained Robyn more than she expected. Much of her was paralyzed. For so long, Kody had been her entire universe, but deep inside her, another piece of her sensed something she hadn't in a long time: relief. Watching Aurora, Robyn recognized something she hadn't recognized in years: freedom. The very child she'd worked so hard to protect was now standing up to protect herself. And even as it rent Robyn's heart in two to see her walk away from the building that she'd so desperately struggled to save, something in her was sparked, something that had lain dormant for far too long. Aurora's rebellion was not some overwrought teenage tantrum or passing phase. It was a declaration of independence, and it forced every single person in that house, especially Robyn, to confront the lies they'd been carrying around for years. That was the moment when Kody's illusion of control began to break down irretrievably. Robyn had been telling herself for years that she was living the dream, the big, loving family, the shared sisterhood, the notion that love would compound instead of split. She clung to that fantasy so hard, she didn't see what was falling apart in front of her face. Breaking, though, was something wide open inside Robyn when she saw Aurora stand up for Kody. Breaking something she couldn't help but see anymore. She realized those endless conversations with Kody weren't about sharing, about being together. They were about his adamant need for loyalty. Every decision she thought they made together, just another brick in the wall of emotion she built around him. She had surrendered her freedom, her boundaries, even her voice, all in support of a man who survived on control. And now, Robyn was beginning to see just how far down she'd slipped. She was drowning financially just to maintain appearance. Once she'd imagined building a safe, happy home, but the truth was she was just holding on, burdened by debt and fear, the secret loan, the credit cards filled to capacity, the land that was supposed to be their family sanctuary. It was all coming crashing down like a deck of cards. To continue, Robyn began to sell some of her own belongings, jewelry with memories attached, family heirloom, even clothes that she had cherished. She reminded herself that it was just a phase, that it was all for family's benefit. But deep down inside, she knew she was so desperately clinging to a reality of the life that no longer existed. Behind the camera, she confided with producers during one raw and emotionally drained moment. She admitted the truth. The perfect family brand was a facade. If it ever had been, it wasn't anymore. The financial burden was more than anyone outside the family circle would ever know. Kody's assurances of stability and financial success? Lip service. Robyn closed up, displaying just how isolated she felt, how even the idea of sharing with her sister wives had vanished along with their bond. The family meals now staged, smiles brittle and false. She told him how she tried to hide the overdue bill, and Kody just went on spending money as if nothing ever happened to him. And finally, she saw reality. She had been Kody's last protector, his shield from reality. Protecting him, she lost her own dignity, her peace, and her mind. But when Aurora stormed out of that door, Robyn saw a mirror. She had lived for another's pride, not her own peace or the happiness of her children. In that candid acknowledgement, Robyn was no longer the submissive wife. She was a woman who was finally coming out of a long, painful delusion. She knew that she could no longer identify with herself. The same woman who had once clung so tightly to visions of unity and love had been reduced to mere survival, and that tough honesty, voiced over television, was the beginning of her falling apart. It was the first honest step toward taking back her life, stepping out of the ruins of Kody's falling kingdom. Kody never believed he was anything other than the center of the universe he had built. He thought that his charm and sweeping monologues would be sufficient to hold it all together, even as cracks began to form deep beneath the surface. But that day of the community forum tore that illusion apart in the most public, unrelenting manner possible. He stood at the podium, trying to mount a defense on his usual panache, same smooth phrasing, same honed charm. But none of it fell on receptive ears this time. The moment he opened his lips, a wave of boos washed through the crowd, and then the chant. High, clear, biting. Kody lied. Over and over, it rolled through the room like a beat of reality he could not silence. You could see it hit him. He had spent years calling the shots, spinning every situation to suit his tale. But here, in the bright lights and unyielding scrutiny of the people, he had no excuse. Those very same people he'd claimed to be bringing together were against him. Those very same fans who'd cheered him on were now incensed, outraged by his deceit, the financial malfeasance, and promises he tossed about like confetti before he left it in the dust. Relative and friend, both. Family members stood on the sideline, dumbfounded, saddened, but also quietly relieved. This was the moment when the spell was finally broken. For the wives who had been married so long to cycles of self-doubt and emotional manipulation, this was public vindication of everything that they'd felt in private. It was all true. The lies, the gaslighting, the emotional wounds concealed behind scripted smiles. And Kody's freefall only grew more intense. As the room turned on him, he raged, blaming the media, the fans, even the family members who had stood by him longest. His voice shook, his face turned red, and for a moment, he didn't look like a leader anymore. He looked like a man completely undone, brought low by the same ego that had raised him up. From that day on, Kody's world contracted. His tight-knit circle he used to dominate fell apart. The community shunned him. Even his cyber fans began to move away, exhausted by the incessant excuses and whining half-truths. He thought he could rise above the blowback, but instead he was alone, powerless, spectating, as the remaining loyal faces faded away. And in that aloneness, it finally dawned on him. He wasn't the patriarch or the visionary he thought he was. He was just a man lost in the ruins of the empire he had built to sustain himself. But from the ruins, something lovely started to grow. Christine and Janelle, once overshadowed, once silenced, emerged stronger. They were not waiting for Kody's next apology or the next broken promise. They had a purpose, a plan, and a strong sense of direction. Christine especially exuded confidence. The same woman who once walked on tip for Kody's wrath now loomed above Janelle, glowing, electric, and speaking candidly about beginning. She and Janelle offered a new program, something raw and inspiring, a program for healing, growth, and candid discussion on what it entailed to rebuild after decades of emotional abuse. Fans could feel the chemistry between the pair. It was not even a TV idea. It was a declaration. We are no longer his story. Meanwhile, Mary went a less sensational path to step into her truth. She didn't need to get sold on something big or have flashing lights. She returned to the words she counted on most, her notebooks. She began reading them aloud, releasing the pieces of her heart that she'd kept locked away for so long. It was truthful, it was real, and it was fierce. Her words were laden with years of wondering if she was ever truly enough. The quiet mornings spent primping a smile. The restless nights questioning where she belonged. In those hidden pages, Mary rediscovered a strength she'd nearly forgotten she possessed. These women didn't just reclaim their identity, they constructed something new from scratch. Their stories, once censored by Kody's control, now told in their own words, in their own time. And each giggle, each tear, each moment of introspection, it was real. Altogether, they had become greater than they ever were within that fractured family. They were a movement, one fans had waited for, one built on truth, healing, and unbreakable strength. Audiences had witnessed these women give up pieces of themselves year in and year out, all in the hopes of attaining some sliver of love, some glimmer of approval. But now they were finally free. And it showed in everything that they did, from the choices they made to the dreams they no longer denied. The wives demonstrated that even after decades of being small, they could rise up, take space, and create a ripple of inspiration in thousands of others. Watching them step out of Kody's shadow and into their own light was like watching the sky lift after a long, wild storm. Sure, it was messy. Sure, it hurt. And yet, in the end, there was something awe-inspiring, something unstoppable about the freedom they had won. Robyn once believed love was a matter of sacrificing yourself. She spent years bending, shrinking, trying to make Kody happy, or at least not trigger his explosions. But the moment Aurora came through that door with her bags packed, something deep inside Robyn stirred. Something she could no longer suppress. The weight of all those years came crashing down. The endless moves, the tears silently cried, the constant struggle to get Kody's attention, the lies she told herself and the world just to get by. It all hit her at once. She had worn herself out for a man who never once noticed her. The dream finally ended. Quietly, without fanfare or dramatics or announcements, Robyn began sitting down with lawyers. No cameras, no Kody yelling in the background. Just a woman who was exhausted, afraid, but finally clear. She filled out the forms for legal and financial separation, something she never imagined doing. But to her, this wasn't something to make a statement about. It was about reclaiming who she once was, protecting what remained of her family, and leaving the wreckage behind with whatever degree of peace she could hold on to. As Robyn planned her escape, Aurora's voice began to rise. In a raw, tearful interview that went viral within minutes, Aurora spoke out. She spoke about the suffocating control Kody had over her life, how it felt to be used like a pawn in someone else's game. She spoke of her mother's sacrifices and how she would not go down that same road. Aurora's voice trembled, but it was rebellious. She wasn't being nice now. She wasn't sugarcoating the hurt. She wanted the world to hear the truth. Fans were stunned to hear her speak so openly, especially about the loneliness she felt in a house full of people. Her voice cracked as she spoke. For the first time in her life, she finally felt alive. Those few raw minutes hit harder than any scripted confession ever could. Robyn didn't wait for headlines to fade. She moved quietly. She relocated to Utah with her younger children. No public farewell, no media release, only resolute quiet. She sold furniture, shut off joint accounts, and started fresh in a small rental home. No cameras now. No judgment now. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't living under Kody's moods or his endless need for adoration. Both Robyn and Aurora were so brave, not just by leaving, but by beginning again. They relearned to breathe on their own without Kody dictating every one of their movements. And although most believed Robyn would cling to the last thread of her marriage, she surprised everyone. She chose herself. She chose her children. Over a man who never cared for anything except the image staring back at him from the mirror of admiration. Ultimately, Kody was left completely and totally alone. No wives to manipulate, no daughters to guilt, no fans to defend him. The man who believed he was the star of a great, unbreakable family now sat in the silence he had created. The final curtain didn't fall amid applause, but amid the stifling silence of truth. Because to leave is not merely to sign papers or pack boxes. It's about tearing yourself from the self you've been for so long. It's about standing before the mirror and finally saying, "I deserve better," and then having the courage to step into that unknown. Seeing Robyn and Aurora opt for freedom over fear was a reminder. Real courage isn't always noisy. Sometimes it's the quiet, resolute, no more. For Robyn, making that decision meant risking all she thought she needed. For Aurora, it meant letting go of the only kind of family she had ever known. Their stories instruct us that healing is never straightforward. It's complex. It hurts. It's full of nights when you question everything. But on the other side of that hurt is something worth it. Peace. So, what do you think? Do you think Robyn will finally find the peace she's been searching for?